Robinson, and this is the Gnostic Secrets Podcast. Thank you for joining me tonight. Once again, all are welcome, no matter your belief system or your background. Anyone can learn, and everyone has more to learn, including me and everyone else. So tonight, it has been a while since I've done a podcast, and for that, I'm definitely in a sort of way sorry, but it's time to begin again. Thank you for joining us once again tonight. My name is Sam Robinson. This is the Gnostic Secrets Podcast, and we are going to talk about something that is quite definitely controversial, but must be spoken about. And there have been several podcasters of extremely high caliber, like Mark Passio on his What on Earth is Happening podcast, that have spoken about this at length. But not enough people talk about it. Nobody really wants to talk about it. And many just don't see it or don't comprehend that the changes we see have been deliberately engineered by the Sorcerers of Consciousness and Dark Occultists. So what am I talking about? It is what Mark Passio has called the war on the sexes, Dark Neo-feminism, and the destruction of the divine feminine archetype by the New World Order elite occultists. And it's been going on for quite a while now. If you stretch back 70, 80 years and you look at how women and men interacted in marriage, in relationships, in society, and the roles and energy types exhibited by both the sexes, it's not that things were perfect, but things were in a natural cosmic alignment with their type on each of the four planes: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. Physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. So it's not that those things were in complete harmony, but they weren't so misaligned as to be total inversion like they are now. It has been deliberately inverted over the last 75 years by social engineering and dark occultic changes and slow changes in consciousness, slow changes in sociocultural conditioning. Gradualism is one of the key tools that these sorcerers of consciousness utilize to change and modify behaviors in a target population so as to be unnoticeable until long after it's occurred. You start with one change, say, in the cultural sphere. You change music. You start off with Elvis. The next decade it gets a little more risque, and it keeps going every decade, getting more and more risque, getting more and more debauched, getting more and more degenerate, until 70 years later you don't even recognize the music scene. Not that there aren't good musicians out there, but I'm talking about the popular cultural acceptability of what's in the music sphere, socioculturally, and whether or not it is in resonance with the typical energy archetypes, and is also, not to mention, appropriate. But if you are within that, if you were within the milieu of the changes, say in the 50s or the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, you aren't going to really notice such dramatic shifts. Each decade will be a shift, but it's incremental, so you don't notice it. Same thing with what I'm talking about here, with the creating this war on the sexes, which is really a war between the sexes. The male and female sexes, specifically in the Western world populations, in their cultures and societies, and definitely in America, has had a complete radicalized shift and been totally inverted in an archetypal way, to where everything has changed. Everything has become backwards and flipped, to the point that the family unit has almost started to totally disintegrate, which was, of course, the idea. One of the ideas of this goal by these dark occultists was to institute this, what some have called the fourth wave feminism. Others call it, just neo-feminism. Mark Passio calls it Dark Neo-feminism. And I like to agree with that specific terminology because it is quite dark. And it is a new form of dark feminism. Now, original feminism was perfectly normal and perfectly necessary. It was totally necessary. I would claim myself as a feminist of the original type over 100 years ago, where people were fighting for women's rights to be heard, rights to vote, rights for various things in society. They were seen as second class citizens. That's not okay. It was never okay. And it was long overdue, largely created by, I hate to say it, the Christian patriarchy, archetype, and conceptual framework that had been around for centuries. But it wasn't just that. But there was a big part of it that came from radicalized Christians and their extreme patriarchal traditionalism. But that's not the only reason. There was never an allowance for a harmonic equilibrium between the sexes in their roles and in their lives and in their relationships between each other. So that was not okay. So I would definitely claim that feminism was absolutely necessary. Now, unfortunately, this has been, as always, hijacked and remolded by these sources of consciousness, and they have created this new dark neo-feminist movement that doesn't even see itself as dark, doesn't even see itself as neo-feminist. They just see themselves as feminist, and they probably immensely think that they are part of the original feminism and that they must destroy the patriarchy, as they say all the time. Yet it's not the patriarchy that's the problem. It's not the males that are the problem. They were the problem in a certain sense. But the current explosion of anti male propaganda, specifically anti white male, but we'll just say anti male, and anti masculinity, anti divine masculine, has been very, very prevalent and been deliberately percolated within the sociocultural matrix of our frameworks for the last 30 years through media, through movies, through propaganda, through celebrities, through music, you name it. Now, why is there an assault on the masculine? Well, it's not just the masculine. That's what most people don't seem to understand. Yeah, the overt, out in the open, clear as day assault and attack on what traditional masculinity and males represent as an archetype is definitely being attacked. But what the males don't see, and what the females definitely don't see, is that this all started first by the assault upon the divine feminine archetype in the actual push of this dark neo-feminist agenda. They attacked women so that then women could attack the men. And it was brilliant. And it's been really disgusting and sad to see this unfold when both sides don't see this. I mean, I know so many people that are divorced that had relationships that crumbled from each partner, like a male partner and a female partner, where the female partner is actually still representing the divine archetype, but yet the male does not, and so they end up separated, and they end up in all these issues. And then you have the other one, the most typical one nowadays. I have several friends that have had this happen, where their female partner in marriage was completely overtaken by this dark neo-feminist conceptual, you know, permeations, whether through friends, through media, through culture, through you know, you name it. It's everywhere. It's in the media. It's on social media. It's in the news. It's in magazines. It's on Vogue. It's everywhere. To where the concept of men being masculine. Not that it's always good to be so masculine. There needs to be a balance always, but the concept of toxic masculinity and the idea of alpha males, just strong male archetype, strong type, being bad, seen as disgusting, seen as less, seen as undesirable, creating the idea of it being an undesirable union for reproduction is just saturated media for the last several decades, specifically in the last 15 years. And it destroyed several of my friends' marriages because their wives changed and then they left them. And some would, want to look at all sorts of other reasons for that, except for the fact that what the female was saying was exactly out of the mouths of these social engineers. How he was, too traditionally masculine, too much of the divine masculine archetype. They wouldn't say it that way, but that's what it is. And instead, they wanted specifically a more controllable, a more meek, a more dominable, one able to be dominated type of male, one that would bend the knee to the new dark neo-feminist energy, where they're in charge, they're in control. And the problem with this is that what I've noticed is both sides want to be in control, and that's never it's always been an imbalance. And whether it's women or men, clearly it's been men for thousands of years, most likely. But the main issue here is the fact that within the individual, whether it's male or female, there has to be a harmonic equilibrium of the confluence of forces that make up their being. You can't have too much of one type. And unfortunately, for most of our history, we've had too much of one type. Too much in the male, over abundance of masculine traits and energy, and too much concentration on parts of the archetypal man at the expense of the less desirable and less easy to attain attributes of their spiritual side or their emotional side. The mind and the physical took precedent at the expense of the emotion and the spiritual. And for women, it was the other way around. The mind and the physical took a side seat, took a back seat traditionally, and the emotional and the spiritual were the driving forces for their being. And instead, we've now had a complete inversion of principles here, to where it's not that things have become equalized or been moved into equilibrium. It's the exact opposite. Now all we've done is switch the imbalance in both sets to where men are now less physical and less mentally dominant or strong, but they're also now still emotionally weak as well as spiritually weak. So now you just have nothing. You just have all four types: the astral body, the physical body, the etheric body, and the mental body. All have been weakened by design. And in the female, you've had the spiritual basically paralyzed. You've had the emotional run unchecked, and you've had the physical and the mental become much more dominant, to where we now have an overabundance of those traits and energies in the female. And what you end up with is this society where everybody's divorced. Divorce rate is 50%. You have relationships that continually fall apart in my generation. It's not every relationship by any means, but it's a lot of them. Ones that should have stayed together. That's another thing that they've destroyed in the family, is the family unit, and the idea that the family unit, if you decide to have one, a real family with kids, that is a sacred duty. It's a spiritual duty to raise children. That is what it is. It's not an ornament like it's seen today. It's not ornamentation to your life. It's not an accessory. It is a divine, sacred, spiritual duty to raise another being's consciousness and their spiritual bodies into maturity before they go off on their own. And that's not how anyone sees it anymore. It has now become utterly about themselves, while their kids take a back seat. And thus, we have more messed up kids. We have terrible parents. They're self-centered, self-focused, to the point where it is acceptable to break up a family over the most minuscule of reasons that would have made you aghast 50 years ago. You would have been ostracized by your peers in society, and you would never have wanted to talk about it if you'd done that. Specifically, I'm talking about largely women doing this to men, but Men would do it to women back in the day, and because they wanted to sleep around. It's not okay for either side to do any of those things. The very sacred nature of the union of male and female, divine feminine and divine masculine, is to have a balance of types where they can merge together and create a holistic union of energy and equilibrium between their four bodies that run into two different sets. Men are largely concentrated with energy in their mind and their physical body. Their mental body and their physical body are positive, as they would call it. Their emotional and spiritual bodies are negative, meaning receptive, and thus they don't have nearly as much access to them. And then with women, you have the exact opposite. The physical and mental body are negative. And the positive ones, the ones we see the most of, is their spiritual and emotional bodies, which is why they're more emotional than we are there. It's like, think of it positive being like almost electrically charged type of energy. You can see that. With the men, it's clearly electrically mental. With the women, it's clearly electrically emotional and spiritual. And, you could say physical with both, but largely men are very, very electrically positive in terms of their physical body and their physical presence and energy. But back to the extreme issues I'm seeing with our world today that no one wants to talk about. I know people like my sister, whose partner betrayed her and ghosted her, and they have a kid together. And I have my good friend whose wife left him after 14 years. And these are just examples; they're anecdotal. But what's fascinating to me is that both these individuals, one's female, my sister, one's male, they both want to attack the opposite sex and work in generalities about the other sex. They're just this. Men are just like this. Women are just like that. Anytime I bring up the fact that that's not at all how it is, that there has been social engineering on a mass scale to create these types of changes in individuals, which then percolate throughout our consciousness as a group, and these individuals get changed and modified and become degenerate in one way or another, and then that expresses itself in relationships. It's not about the man or the woman, except in the fact of which type of agenda has been executed upon them. But they both don't get it, and I get a lot of flack from my male friends whenever they have been jaded and they lash out at females. Not two females' faces, but like in front of the boys, meaning like the guys. Whether they go on these like tirades, so to speak, on like a Nick Fuentes style level, where they're like, they need to be back in the kitchen. They need to be doing this. They need to be submissive. They must submit. And I'm like, absolutely not. What are you talking about? That is not how this works. That is what they want you to do, these dark occult sorcerers of consciousness. They want you to double and triple and quadruple down on the traditional patriarchal Christian type of oversaturated male energy. They want that. They want to engineer that, and they are engineering that. It's working. And in the female, they want to do the same thing. Since they're doing it to the men, making the men that are not willing to become emasculated and do whatever women want, the strong ones are much more likely to gravitate towards their traditional Christian patriarchal archetype energetically than to do something new. And they know that. These engineers know that, these social engineers. And so when they create this societal situation, that's what's going to happen. I mean, it's natural. But almost no one's not going to do that, unfortunately, because they're just not going to think about it and they're going to be hurt. So it makes sense. But they also know that because they know how we think and how we act. And especially when you have religious archetypes involved, it makes it even easier for them to manipulate you. So the traditional men are going to be more like that again. They're going to double down on Christian patriarchy. And the women are going to see that and be like, see, I knew all along. It's the patriarchy, this toxic masculinity. We can't have these toxic masculine dudes all over the place, just destroying everything and lacking emotional awareness and emotional intelligence, as they like to call it. So they generate the man, and the women reacts by doubling down on the fact that they don't like that type of man because it's an overabundance of the bad energy already, just magnified. And so it's a brilliant psyop, truly. But the dark neo-feminist agenda is where this all begins. This is where it all starts. When you alter women like this, like they've done for decades now, when you take the divine feminine, to me, one of the most sacred archetypes that's probably existing, the one that holds it all together, the one that is the most necessary, the very foundation of our social cultural framework, is designed on the divine feminine holding it all together in the family unit. Because from this family unit outspreads the influence of a whole strong, grounded, and harmonic family unit. Energy radiates out. It creates a chain reaction of all the different types across the society. As I was saying, sorry, my cute little cat back there interrupted me. His name is Inky, by the way, after the Sumerian god Inky. Named him during my awakening. He's a cute little buddy. He's my little familiar. Back to what I was saying. The divine feminine is the foundation of Western civilization and the human species, as far as I'm concerned. The divine masculine protects her. But without the divine feminine, there is no divine masculine. She is the necessary foundation for all of our societal makeup. The entire civilization is founded on her holding it all together so that the men can do what needs to be done to protect her and everything else that she doesn't do. It's not that she shouldn't work or should work. She is the pillar for the family. She is the moral pillar. She is the spiritual pillar. She is the one that makes men the better men that they want to be. A divine, feminine, aligned woman makes a man want to be better, to be his best in every way possible. It's not what happens anymore. It's not that that's always been what happened. That may be the idealized form of it. But men will alter themselves to be what the woman wants them to be so that they can get married and reproduce. So these sorcerers of consciousness realized that to change the men, all you really got to do is change the women, and the men will simply follow because they want to reproduce. That is what they want to do. So the extreme, monumental targeting of the female archetype by social engineering has been totally without precedent, and is an overwhelming onslaught of negative propaganda and degenerate cultural concepts being incepted into the minds of traditional females and just any female that they can get their claws into. And so over the 50-year period, 75-year period, really, since World War II, everything has changed. And everyone always chalks this up to it being absolutely natural, a natural consequence of technological and cultural changes. Of course, if they knew their history, they'd know that there's been that before, and that never occurred. They'd say that, well, that was the patriarchy that did allow it to occur. No. This is in white papers. This has very specifically been designed to do this to women and to change their habits, change what they want in a relationship, change what they're drawn to in a man, change how they want to reproduce, when they want to reproduce, and if they want to reproduce. And so the content saturation targeting women, advertisement, media, propaganda, cultural concepts from all the different types of magazines, from Vogue to everything else, as 80% of it's designed, again, towards women, to only 20% to men. I said it's just for money. It's like, well, no, men spend money too, obviously. It's because they want to alter the mating and relationship habits of the species in the Western world. And they've largely done so. And they've worked very hard to do this, to destroy the divine feminine in women and and erect this transmogrification, this transmutation of the divine feminine into the dark neo-feminine energy archetype, which is the total opposite of the divine feminine in every way possible. And this dark neo-feminist agenda, I would say, and I think Mark Passio says this as well. This is really, to be more specific, a new form of eugenics. They're done with the old form. People think eugenics is all about experimentation by forced breeding habits. They don't have to force it. They've found ways to socioculturally engineer it by small changes and gradually over time, to where if you change the very societal frameworks and ideas around relationships and around attraction between male and females, and you slowly chip away and replace it with your own forms, well, you'll clearly alter their relationship habits and their reproductive habits and their marriage habits. And no one would ever be the wiser until it's too late. Not only do they want to do that, they want to do far more. They want to breed out the divine masculine archetypes as men until there's only this emasculated, degenerate, weakened version of the traditional male archetype who would never resist their stuff, would never resist any of their machinations, never resist any of their authoritarianism or totalitarian behavior as they try to coalesce it finally in their last stages with AI, transhumanism, and robotics and technocracy. They need there to be no traditional males of a divine masculine type because they'll resist. They will resist. That we will always resist. That is what we do. And so if you re-engineer the cultural concepts behind men and women, men change to be desirable to the women. And what do women want? Well, and if you look at the TV and look at all the things the celebrities say and all the things in the mass media, for the most part, you want a woman, the upper middle class echelon and educated elite, college elite, educated. What do the women want? Well, they want what the universities have taught them to want. They want a metrosexual, emasculated, compliant, and somewhat submissive male to be their husband. They don't want a strong male for the most part. I'm being general, obviously. I mean, I know there's exceptions. There's always exceptions. But this is the cultural concepts right now everywhere. Dozens of women that are talk about it like that are just younger than I am. I'm about to be 40. In the 30s, the early 30s, I got a friend at work, girl. uh, Her entire running group is like that. They talk about the patriarchy. They talk about toxic masculinity. They talk about pronouns. Talk about all these things. And yeah, they're probably in relationships. I know some of them are, but clearly that what they don't want. And they definitely mention patriarchy a lot because I've seen the text messages because they do group text. They're in a running group. She's in a running group. Now she's not like that, but all those girls are. Perfect example. When Charlie Kirk was assassinated, they all responded in the text with disgusting messages like he's probably burning in hell. This is what he deserves. Overbearing patriarchal tyrant. Blah blah blah. So you see what I'm saying? I'm saying if you've been in the college as a woman, it's very hard not to come out like this in today's universities because it's saturated with this type of content. It's everywhere. It's not just online, it's in person. because the professors have changed. And when this kind of stuff would never tread water back in the day, they would never talk about outside issues like this. Not nearly so much. So there's a matrix of neo-feminist propaganda all over the university system, all over the college-educated campuses. And so women come out like that. Not all of them, obviously, but a large portion to where it is changing things. It has changed things. And the manifestations from this occult sorcery and its agenda are just like little tendrils that have just permeated through our societal framework, altering all sorts of things from reproductive rates to divorce rates to the success of relationships to the overabundance of casual sex from women, not men. Men typically did that anyway, and to where it's now praised on video by some like Charlize Theron on the Call Me Daddy podcast, where she's talking about her conquest at like 60 years old of 25-year-olds. It's disgusting, but that's what's cool. That's why it's on the Call Me Daddy podcast. That big podcast by that young girl who's degenerate, because that's what they want. They want degeneracy. They want a destruction of the archetypes of the divine feminine, divine masculine. The divine masculine will just become blackpilled and no longer want to engage with society or gravitate towards Christian nationalism and the rise of a Christian ultra patriarchy, as opposed to evolving into something new, something novel, something harmonically balanced, which is what we need today, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we need. The dark neo-feminist agenda, the dark occultists of the world that are pushing it, and the war on the sexes has had profound impact upon our societies. It's everywhere now. And it's really sad to see it because nobody wants to talk about it. Most people don't even know it's happening because most have been a victim of one side or the other. The rise of a new form of Christian patriarchalism, supercharged, or the men that have been disenchanted by the women that destroyed their lives from influence of the dark neo-feminist propaganda, which then causes the guy to become more patriarchal as a result. And both these things feed off each other, these polarities they're creating. They're using the law of polarity to exacerbate already existing issues in our society between the sexes. And they know that, and they know exactly what they're doing. So, and unfortunately, the ones that have felt that pain, that have been affected by these agendas, they're not going to see this, obviously, because what's the most likely case scenario of how they're going to react to this? They're going to blame the other person. And they will be to blame. But they're not going to see the real culprits to blame, the sorcerers of consciousness at the highest levels of our society that turned their women into these dark neo-feminists and attacked their divine feminine within them, chipped it away, and replaced it with something dark, something inverted, something wholly against the divine feminine. And they did that so they could destroy you, and they could destroy the family, and they could destroy Western civilization, and they could cause a fertility crisis, and they could cause a new form of mating habits that would absolutely weed out any form of divine masculine type from reproducing. And that is absolutely necessary for them to win. And all they had to do was attack the woman. That's all they had to do, because everything else follows. And that's what the one main thing I definitely want some people to take away from this episode tonight is that the dark neo-feminist agenda is specifically designed to destroy the divine feminine in women so that radiates out like a nuclear bomb to all the other connecting filaments of society that it influences, which is basically everything, and to destroy that foundational pillar of the human species and thus destroy us. since it's such a strong pillar. It's one of the most strong pillar. What's just about the strongest pillar for our society that we have is the divine feminine in women. If you destroy that and you invert that into something completely satanic and archontic, well, you've just about totally conquered us if you keep that up. If you keep that up for a couple centuries, we're done. We're done. All the men that would have fought back are gone. They have been weeded out. All the other men will have completely gotten in line as emasculated, submissive, versions of themselves. And the technocratic elite will have absolutely pulled off their world government and transhumanism, if that's the case. Not saying the divine feminine doesn't fight too, but the divine masculine is the warrior that will immediately pick up the sword and fight back against tyranny. Women also do it, but that's the traditional male role right there. And you weed them out, well, you've won. You've totally won. Or if you blackpill all those people, you've won. Or if you get them diverted and gravitated in towards a Christian nationalist patriarchal movement, you've also won. Because that isn't going to fix anything either. What will fix it? In my opinion, just my opinion, from what I see and what I've gathered, what I've experienced, and what I've studied, the key to not just stopping the dark neo-feminist agenda, but the key to our spiritual evolution, ladies and gentlemen, our spiritual evolutionary path is to redesign and evolve both sexes' concepts of each other and form in both types of people a true equilibrium of forces on all four planes: spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical plane, to where there's no overbalance in any two areas or one area, that there's not a super concentrated amount of energy at the expense of other parts. That's been the problem all along, and maybe that was necessary back 2,000, 5,000 years ago. But what's necessary now is harmony in our inner being on all four planes, so that then we can be in equilibrium with the opposite sex and each other and have truly sacred relationships and societies that will radiate out from those relationships and those family units they create in equilibrium, in a state of pure energetic equilibrium. And that is the last thing the technocratic elite want to occur. And they're doing everything in their power to stop it by attacking women, who then attack the men. And then that attacks the entire family unit structure, which then destroys the civilization. It's just kind of how it's just like one piece after. It's just like you pull one piece out at the bottom of any structure and the whole thing collapses. Well, you know what I mean. It's a house of cards in that sense. You pull that one, everything follows. There's a domino effect. So people need to understand what is going on when it comes to this form of alleged feminism that is social and culturally permeating our entire society, especially in America. That what's really going on here. It's not that women are just bad. It's not that men just don't understand and they lack emotional insight and sensitivity. It's none of those things. That's also just propaganda. It's that there's a deliberate agenda to build up certain type of